Zach here, and welcome to the Used Car Dealer Podcast. Today, we're joined by a true pioneer in the auto industry, John Traver, the founder and CEO of Traver Connect. John is credited with inventing the original BDC model for dealerships back in 1991 and built a career at the intersection of innovation, fixed ops, and customer engagement. John, you've seen it all in the industry. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Zach, thanks for having us. What a treat to be able to be part of your podcast. And maybe haven't seen it all, but seen a little bit, and it keeps me coming back for sure.
Thanks. And John, take us back to how you got in the auto industry and your origin story.
I think that origin, it may be like yours. You and I talked offline here before we started, but I stumbled, right? I stumbled. It wasn't the career goal. I stumbled in it almost by accident. I basically got on the showroom floor first. I was working at Wild Dodge in Waukesha, Wisconsin in the 80s. Quite the process of getting there. And through that process, I think one of the inflection points for me, Zach, early on was, do you remember that commercial for Life cereal? And they would always pick on the boy, Mikey. And, they'd have him, the kids would have him, because Mikey likes anything or likes everything, whatever the punchline was. I look back and I think they Mikey'd me in that first year. So I'm a salesperson and I'm paying my way through college, and it was a Dodge store, and they had to have certain credits from Chrysler for parts, service, F&I, et cetera. And getting people to go to these workshops was very hard. They'd always send me. They're like, send a college kid. And so it would take me off the showroom floor, but I found myself also getting a quick education on the business. By the time I finished my first year, I probably had 75 hours of training time in other parts of the dealership. So what happened is I got this macro view of how things ideally were designed to work. And what I found was I'm looking at how we did what we did, and I'm like, that's not how we do it. And I can see the gaps. So I think part of it was how my brain worked. I'm interested in how systems work and the visible, invisible. But what I saw, Zach, was a chaotic sales process. I saw also consumers were smarter. So like at that time, you didn't have the internet, right?
Right.
But you had magazines, and they were like Motor Trend, Car and Driver, Road and Track, Consumer Report, and they began to share invoice pricing. So this was the beginning of that in automotive, where it's like the consumer knows what the vehicle costs. Now, the fact is that wasn't exactly what it cost, because you had DAA fees on top of that. And, and the customer, we can't stay in business selling cars at cost, right? We're paying for signs and lights and insurance and people and all this other soft stuff. But it was a very interesting time. And we also had a lot of retailers that were still sort of old school in their assumption of how to do business with a customer. It was basically, buy or die. Like today is the day. And that the problem with that is you had more vehicles and models in the industry. We went from, in 1982, you had 200 vehicles and models. 1988, you had 600 plus. By 1993, we were over 900, I think it was 909 vehicles and models to choose from. So you would go on Dealer Row and you had new signs, whether that was Saturn or whatever. It wasn't just your father's Buick,
Yeah.
So my point to all this, and I could just go on and on about this, but what I was seeing happening was they weren't taking account for that. So when you add more information to a process for a consumer, they're going to take more time. So if your approach is fast and furious, you're not going to get your share.
Right.
And that was sort of the epiphany. It was like, hey guys, you're not going to close them all in the first visit, because they know invoice. They want to feel like they got a good deal. They want to be educated. There's more choices, which means more time. So if I were you, what I would do is I would adjust the way you're selling so you get more by there's a longer buying cycle. J.D. Powers had a deal back then, buddy. It was called the Shopping Dynamics Study. You can look it up. It was like 92, 93, 94. And back then I paid $99 a month to J.D. Powers to get this daily facsimile. It was a one pager, right?
Wow.
And yeah, it was one page, $99 a month, 5 days a week. I get this fax. And it's like your top items. And that's how I stumbled on this dynamic study. And so I'd already started Traver Tech at that point, but long and short, it was I saw an outdated sales process. I saw outdated thinking. I saw gaps in the ecosystem of the dealership. And the big question I had was, why do we spend so much money trying to acquire a customer? I know what we make. I know what we make front and back. And I'm not even talking fixed yet. But so Used Car Dealer Podcast, I mean, I get it. But to me, once you have units in operation in your PMA, like there should be a strategy to decrease that cost of sale. And what I saw with advertising people coming in is I saw the trend and I'm like, that is never going to go down. That they are going to walk us up the hill for sure. So what we got to figure out is margin compression. We got to get ahead of that. And we're going to have to figure out how to win some deals. The other thing I saw, and I know this is a long answer, but these were all material parts of what I thought through. I saw incredible turnover. Like we're churning through human beings. And I'm like, we're letting salespeople. Now I was there because I was paying my way through school. This was a roadside stop for me. I wasn't going to finish here. Now here I am almost 40 years later. Right. And I think there's a lot of people that are in this business that would say that, you know, they want to use the business as a stair step to something else, which is okay. But I saw turnover and I'm like, well, of course we're going to turn people over. You know why? Because they're making their living off of fresh ups. That's it. And so fresh ups were, and those that don't know, in case you don't know, a fresh up was a guest on the, on your lot, on your showroom floor that you didn't know. They didn't call ahead. They just showed up. So your trust is uber low. The gross, very small. It's just an awkward sort of warm up that you had to go through. There wasn't really a business relationship established. And the alternative to that, to me, was the phones. And I felt like, well, first of all, when they call, the phone up to me was pure gold because I could build a rapport with that customer. I could understand what was important to them. I could figure out what wasn't so that they knew when they talked to me, they're like, hey, that Traver dude, he gets me. So that was one. Two was on following up on customers. I learned different ways to ask questions because I understood what they were going through. And so that became sort of a business practice. So I saw what was broke. The curiosity led me in. I don't know that I revolutionized anything. Tom Stuker was ahead of me, and he had what was called the phone room. So for those that have been around a long time, they'll remember that. Now, the difference, and I know Tom, and we've talked and had nice conversations at certain points in our career together, but Tom's deal was different than what I was trying to do. The similarities were use the phone. The difference, though, what I tried to do is build out this entire system that included software. It included a college for the business development managers that they came through. And so 20 years later, we had run 20,000 managers through our BD college at Traver Technologies. Wow. Yeah. So those, I looked at it a little different. I was just trying to not be a prisoner to the business. I really wanted to contribute. I knew that at that time it was like 1 in 7 or 1 in 8, 1 in 9 people were in the automotive industry somehow, some way. So that's how I got in this space, buddy.
So talk about like the early days of BDC adoption and how that went. Like, were dealers skeptical? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
That's a cool question. Well, the early 90s were an interesting time. Gulf War. I remember one of my first clients was not the first, but an early client was Rorick, Rohrich, Rorick Toyota. And they were in Pittsburgh. And Bob Gower, who today is my chief operating officer at Traver Connect, was the general manager there. And David Rorick was the dealer. His dad had built the stores and had passed away, and David was running it. And David was very sharp and had a sharp pencil. And I remember after the first year, and it was around the Gulf War, we had sold like 50 or 75 more cars year over year. It wasn't great. And I knew David was tough. And I sat down with him to renew the 1-year training and consulting agreement and so forth and software. And I thought I was really going to get taken to the woodshed.
Yeah.
And David was he was green light go. And he's like, hey, great first year. And I'll be honest with you. So I was just in full listen mode. And he's like, when you came in here a year ago, we were in like second from last in our district in Toyota, and we're second today. And so that was my next, wait a minute, I need to look at this beyond just retail units. What was happening is we were converting more of the showroom traffic.
Right.
And we had only sold a few more cars, but everybody else, because of the Gulf War, had lost market share. So I began to look at the business and I said, you know what? I need to pay attention to the right data, not just myopic data. So you probably can relate to that in some of the things you've done. So when I launched that first thing, it was a mixed bag, buddy. I mean, some were skeptical, others were all in. The skeptics, it was like, why do I need to? Back then, we used salespeople. And my whole idea was to decrease turnover, right? So it was like, I want to turn these people into business people. I want more than half of their business to be predictable. I want you to schedule 3 appointments a day. Of that, 2 will show, 1 will roll. That's 20 a month. So every day we're scheduling 3 appointments. We're putting it in the queue. And so tomorrow when I walk in, I may have 2, 3, 4, 5 appointments. That's going to be a good day. And so how do I do that? Well, I do that with incoming phone ups. I do it with unsold showroom traffic follow-up that I set the next appointment for. I'm more dialed into what they need. I'm working my owner base. I'm household prospecting. Like this is pre-internet even. So it wasn't hard. It was yes. So the forward thinkers, as soon as I said, look, I had the first, tell you a quick story. I had one of my trainers early on come back and he's like, man, I'm getting my teeth kicked in. Every time I go to the stores, they're not engaged and they send me to the training room and I get the salespeople and it's a cold fish handshake and I'm seeing the disengagement. And I had done all the training up to that point, but now I'm starting to have to duplicate myself. And I thought, Traver, you're going to lose these guys. You're going to lose this whole lot. You better figure this out. So I did a management awareness conference. And I had my wife cook like a breakfast and a lunch, and it was a one day, and I had a bunch of, ADHD dealers like that sitting in front of me, like, this better be good, right. And no offense to those of you with ADHD. And I knew I had basically 30 minutes to get this right, or they were going to have a reason to leave. And I said, look, there's no way I can possibly teach you everything I'd like to teach you about business development today. But what I can do in the next 15 minutes is tell you all you really need to know. Enough so that you're probably going to want to stay the rest of this day to get the rest of it, because it is an absolute game changer for your business. So here it is. It's called the appointment ratio. And the appointment ratio is the relationship of salespeople you have on the showroom floor to confirmed appointments today for the showroom floor. So if you have a 1-to-1, if you have 10 salespeople, you have 10 confirmed appointments. It may not be 1 for each guy, but your ratio. And if you have 10 confirmed appointments, you're going to sell, how many cars are you going to sell? We'll sell 6. We'll sell them all. We'll sell 5. But the bottom line is nobody said 2 because appointments close at a higher rate. I said, okay, good. If you have 10 salespeople, but you have 20, you have a 2-to-1. If you have 10 salespeople, you have 30, you have a 3-to-1. So let me tell you the difference. The difference between those 3, 1-to-1, you're going to have you're not going to live in a 10-day month. So if you're a pre-owned dealer, you have the same opportunity. Every day you should be thinking in terms of predictable appointments on the board, right? And what do those clients need? What do those customers need? And is our sales consultants, our team, are they dialed in that way? Are they looking at that need-based approach? And when you do that, it becomes a machine. So we went from, 2-to-1. I told the dealers, I said, listen, you're going to grow. Whatever records you have, you're going to grow. You can book it. 3-to-1, you're probably in the real estate game. You're going to have to figure out auxiliary lots for inventory, things like this. I said, so this really comes down to and I can see the grin on your face, like the light bulb's going off. But that was the job. The job was to simplify this. Notice, I'm not talking metrics. And by the way, your people are going to stick around because they're making money. They're working with people who like them, who trust them, who close at a higher rate, who score them higher in CSI. I mean, that's why we're here, right? So to me, you have to have a percentage of your business that's being done with appointment-based business. And your problem is you're making most of your effort through fresh ups. We'll still take the fresh ups, but that should be the gravy, not the meat and potatoes. And that was my opener. And I could see the body language just shift to the positive level. all right, let's do this. So it was a lightning match. It took a bit to catch. I should say more like lighting a match. It took a bit to catch. The kindling maybe was wet. I had dealers that adopted it slow. Others that, well, oh, you mean a phone room? No, not a phone room. And so I had to sort of evolve that to what we were actually doing. This is a culture. This is about predictable showroom business. This is about a career path for your people. Do you understand what it costs you to go hire and train and develop somebody brand new, show them where the bathrooms are, teach them over and over and over? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Get on your business. You're so buried in it. The old E-Myth, Michael Gerber message, right? So that's how I would answer that question.
So what were some of the biggest operational challenges as you kind of scaled out your business?
Looking back, software, our first Traver BD system was DOS. I couldn't tell you what DOS stood for. Okay. Disk operating system. I learned. Okay. But that's what it stood for. It was a green screen. And why did I do it? I did it. I had forms. Launching Traver Technologies had some difficult phases, needless to say. I had to get buy-in from the audience. They had to understand the vision, the direction, and buy into it. And then it was back then, think about things you took for granted. There were no CRMs.
Yep.
There was no texting. There was barely email. So this was phone calls, and our big challenge, I think, was to invest in learning and development, getting dealers so my pivot there was, I said, listen, what's your ad budget per month? New car, used car? Oh, 60 grand, 100 grand, 30 grand. Okay, great. So I don't want you to spend any more. Okay. I just have one question. What's the purpose of that budget? And the answer is always the same answer. It wasn't a different number. It was the same answer. To create showroom traffic. Excellent. Here's what I want to do. I want to shave off a piece or two of that. I want to reappropriate the spend. Does that make sense? And what I'd like to do is spend a couple bucks on the people who are receiving those leads so that we can convert at a higher level. I'd like to also produce some showroom traffic that's more likely to close via appointment-based business. And so here's how. So if it's 60, I want to use 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 grand. You're not going to miss that anyway. So that way we're not spending anymore, but we're converting more. By the way, I'd like to attack that number over time and decrease it while you slowly increase your retail units. So that to me is more strategic. So the hurdle was, just learning and shifting. There was a data problem. I mean, dealerships to this day, the data in the DMS isn't ideal, right? I'm PC maybe here as I say that. I'm trying to be nice, but they had customer info scattered. When I was at Russ Darrow, I was the director of corporate training for the Russ Darrow Group in the 80s. And we were like this fabulous ADP user. And the ADP would fly new prospective dealers in to, see how we use the ADP showroom control system. This is 80s. And so Russ was a maestro at this, Daddy Russ 2. And he was the founder of Russ Darrow Group and an incredible man, by the way. Again, part of my story are people like Russ Darrow that invested in me, saw the best in me, helped me, were patient with me, pushed me. There are Russes in my back trail. And so I try and be Russ-like for those around me to this day, because I realize how I got here too, But Russ would have, as good as they were, my point on this message is there was nowhere to put a phone up. And there was, it was there were huge gaps. And I'm like, okay, they're not close enough to this process. This is great, but this isn't the whole story. So it'd be like a menu at a restaurant that only has drinks. Like you eat, you're just missing a really important part of what we're doing. So, it was messy. I think every challenge, taught us something and we carried it forward, but it was sort of like building a plane while flying it. So I remember my accountant told me, hey, you should turn these forms that you're selling dealerships into software. And I'm like, I don't know anything about software. And he's like, I got a guy. It was like the old Seinfeld. I got a guy. Everybody's got a guy. I had the guy, right? So I talked to Delton Doss. That was his name. I swear to you. That was my first. And he and I would moonlight at a couple of our stores in Houston at the time. I grew up in the Midwest, but I had moved to Houston and had stores there. And long story short, he said, "What do you need?" I said, "I just need an input screen and a couple reports." And then I needed another report. And then I needed another screen. I needed a couple more reports. And pretty soon we had 100,000 plus lines of code. And we're in lots and lots of stores. And Toyota's got me speaking at, annual learning events for dealers and teaching them this process. So there was no CRM, no real-time data, just paper, small software platform for input, a couple reports, and then it just exploded. And I think the thing that I look back on is like, I could never stop the ideas. They just kept coming in. So we kept writing, we kept building, we kept training, developing, and implementing. And so it grew. And the other differentiation, I think, as I look back, was scripts versus guides. So I dug into how we had to develop people to speak differently. Like our guides weren't just words, they were actually a system. Let me say that again. Our call guides, they weren't just words. They were a system. We taught things like pace, lead. We taught, we taught why that's a better way to communicate. What it did is it got rid of would you, could you, can't you, won't you, or what's it going to take to earn your business today? Crusty stuff that the customer saw coming. I was flashing back to my early days in sales, like, you guys, the keys on the roof thing, oh, we've lost the keys to your trade. Customer knew, they knew, and I didn't align with that. That was awkward to me. So, and data was a scavenger hunt, so the opportunity we seized, I think, was creating a blueprint for centralized business development, and something that dealers, if they do it right, they still lean on today as, they navigate, what they're navigating.
And how did the different services evolve that you offer kind of at your company as technology and dealership operations have got more complex?
Yeah. So back then,
kind of going from back then to now, like the evolution and kind of what you guys have offered dealers.
There's a good rule of thumb for that question. Jeff Bezos, like him or hate him, and there's still a message here. I mean, sometimes I get polarity from an audience when I talk about this, but I think there's still a lesson in it. And that is, he always talks about the empty chair in the room. You know what I'm talking about, right? Mm-hmm. So the audience, in case you don't know what Zach and I are talking about, if you have a table, 6 or 8, chair conference table, there's an empty chair. And it's a metaphorical message of that's the person for whom we've gathered. That's the consumer who's not in this meeting, but this is why we're here. We're going to start with them and work our way back. And so what I did, I think in the beginning, there's a teaching gene in my blood for sure. So I think that's what I led with. And then from there, I think, the software, thank goodness for Jeff, my accountant, who said, "Hey, Jeff Maynard, God bless him. Hey, you need software." He's looking at my books, like all this paper, and that took off. And so from there, it was data, it was relationship, then it was thought leadership up top at the management level. So again, I think if you stay close enough to it and you listen, Jay Abraham said something probably 25 years ago, I heard him say, and it really stuck with me. He said, he's the founder of, Jay Abraham was partners with Tony Robbins and some other people. But he did Wendy's "Where's the Beef" campaign. It was famous. Where's the beef? And it was the old granny. Yeah. But he was famous for copywriting. But he said something one time I'll never forget. He said 90% of the population is silently begging to be led. So I have multiple companies today. We have a few hundred full-time associates in those businesses, incredible people. And I always remind myself that they're all looking for direction. They're all looking for a winning path. Nobody wants to lose, but they might not tell you that every day. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so that's sort of the answer to your question is I just listened for that. I think there's 2 questions every day a business owner, if you owned a pre-owned organization or new or both, there's 2 things you should be asking yourself every day. What do they want me to do? So to me, I think a good leader understands they work for that team. A leader really understands what that looks like. What do they want me to do? And then the second question is, how do I do that well? And what's cool about those two questions is you can teach it to your staff. Like I do here. I tell them that all the time. I said, two things I ask myself every day. What do you guys want me to do? How can I do that well? There was a time where we have a cafeteria here in our offices that seats over 100. And it looks like a sports bar or something. People come through and they're like, gosh, this is unbelievable.
Wow.
And so how did we get there? Well, I didn't start with that. But when I would walk in at noon in the lunchroom that we had was, cold and crappy, I was like, oh, what do they want me to do? They want a better lunchroom. Okay. And then, oh, well, we need live food. So I brought in an organization that does live food and coolers. And then, okay, we need more space again. So expanded. And this time I had this giant footprint. And so when people come through, they always talk about that. And I think to myself, like, here's another example. We have phone booths that are like, it's this private corridor. And then they have like glass French doors. And
I've seen those at startups.
Place to plug in your phone and you can have a private conversation. Nobody's dipping. I mean, in the summertime here, it gets to be 100,000 degrees, and I would see people sitting on a curb at lunch having a convo. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, Traver, they want you to give them somewhere they can have a conversation in private. And so that was like, okay. So you asked, there's your answer. What do they want me to do? How do I do it well? If your CRM is horrible, if your process is horrible, if your learning and development track is horrible, you know what they want you to do? Fix it. Fix it. But they're not going to tell you always. So listen to those questions, and that'll get you there. You'll be surprised. You've done it. I know you have.
So what separates, let's say, a top performing dealerships that are dealer group or dealership that's using your BDC service versus one that's maybe not as organized, using it, in-house, trying to put together it themselves? Like, what's the difference in their performance? Like, kind of give me your insight on that.
Okay. So I think a top performing service BDC today, which is a huge emphasis at Traver Connect, my new company, having sold the old one to ADP, it lives and breathes two things: clarity, because it can get noisy, million moving parts,
right?
And execution. Good friend of mine, Bob Beal, B-O-B-B-B-I-E-H-L, Bob Beal, 85 years old. He was a mentor to me for a number of years. He was on the board of directors for Focus on the Family with James Dobson for 31 years. That's a long time in a prestigious group. He worked with Peter Drucker. I mean, that's the godfather of big business. I mean, this guy was really unique. And he had these wonderful perspectives. I told Bob, I said, his greatest gift, I would say, is you're a conceptualist. Like, he has this ability to bucket things. And one day he told me, he said, John, the three things you have to be careful of in leadership. He said, number one is fog. Number two is fatigue. And number three is flirtations. And so when you unpack that, dealerships that are top performing, they avoid those three. They look for them and they know how to steer clear. So what is fog? If you and I, let's say we are adventurous, and I'm sure you are at some level, right? So let's say we win a trip to the Autobahn in Germany, and two F1s are going to be waiting for us. And it's a particular date in June. And that June comes and we fly to Munich and they take us out to the Autobahn, and a little bit of rain that night before we wake up the next morning. And Zach, we can't see our hand in front of our face. How fast are we going to drive? Answer, not very.
Not fast.
That's fog. So what happens in business is you slow down when you can't see clear. So you got to look for inside the business where there's lack of clarity. And you have to clarify. You have to lift the fog. You got to give people a clean view. Why we're doing this, what we're doing, how we're going to do it, their role in it, like that. Clarity. It comes from communication, but you have to identify first. That's fog. Fatigue. Okay, brother, I know you're like T-minus 5 miles from Levi Stadium. Okay, so we're brothers in arms in the NFC, but you're talking to a cheesehead here. I know he's just about to throw up now if you're not watching the video, if you're just listening. I'm a cheesehead. He's a Niner fan, probably, but I'm teasing. But, Lombardi said fatigue makes cowards of us all. And that was his way of talking to the guy, saying, when you start getting wore down, you stop doing the basics. You stop. So you got to watch for that fatigue and things that are wearing you out that you're allowing to continue to happen that wear you out. So that's 2. And then 3 is flirtations. Now, when you think flirtations, it is beyond the moral. It actually starts right here in terms of the tactical and strategic. I've seen businesses that start to flirt with ideas that have nothing to do with what they do.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? And it's like, brother, what are you doing? Why don't you stick to what is your why? Why are you doing what you're doing? So clear expectations, know your data. Like in BDC world, the top performing stores know their KPIs. They calls answered, appointments set, the learning and development. They pivot conversations into opportunities. They tech-wise, they stay proactive. They're not reactive. Real-time scheduling, texting confirmations. Those that struggle, they struggle and they get stuck in chaos. Think fog, fatigue, flirtations, inconsistent staffing, or they treat it like a cost center instead of a profit driver. The best ones, they see these interactions as customer experience. They're building trust. They're building revenue. The others, they're just answering the phone, or they're just, sending out bot, yeah. So there you go. That's high level, but hopefully there's some principles in there that make sense.
So how do you strike that balance almost between like people and process and technology when you think about like the BDC world?
Yeah. I would say alignment, number one. There's 3 groups out there. Here's another concept I'm going to give you, and this is the teacher in me. But when you're looking for that balance, first of all, know that you're not going to change anybody, and you will never change everybody. Change is very personal. So, there was a time in my career early on, Zach, where I felt like I could influence people enough to make them change. But what I realized over time is it was just timing. I had gotten to the right person with the right message, but it was their change, not mine. There's 3 types of people in your audience at all time. They're change friendly. That's 25% of your audience at any given time. 25% of the people listening to this for sure are already coming in with that attitude. The fact that they're listening to a podcast probably says that number's even higher. Okay. But, they're going to send this to somebody who didn't listen to it. 50% of your audience is a fencer. And a fencer is somebody who's on the fence. And what they sound like is, oh yeah, absolutely, I agree. But you don't see any action. And then resistors are people that are, yeah, but, and they're just not going to change. And so what you want to do is realize, A, you won't win them all. B, what you're trying to do is help the change friendly successfully change, because the fencers will follow. And 25 plus 50 is 3/4 of your organization. When you can shift 3/4 of your organization successfully, you will move mountains. You will set records. You will accomplish objectives. You're going to do stuff. So I think our top performing stores crush it because they bought into the system top down. GM sets the tone. Service manager tracks metrics. Software is used to monitor. They're proactive. But, what they're doing right is, they're even their vernacular, like we're not a vendor to them. We're a partner. Their customers aren't customers. They're clients.
Right.
I mean, you can tell like everything is different. Those are the top folks.
So how has customer expectations in the service department changed over the last 10 years? And how should dealers listening, how should they adapt or think about adapting?
When I was young, I was adopted at 7. And somewhere between 7 and 10 years old, I had a great grandfather, Grandpa Stout, and a great grandfather. And my parents would ask me to do something, and he'd look at me like, kind of in a warm way. He goes, "You don't have to, but you better."
Right.
Adapting and innovating, let me just say this, are strongly rewarded. So when you start talking about customer expectations, listen to me. You don't have to, but you better. Okay? The rewards are massive. You can adapt by going digital, obviously scheduling, text updates, mobile payments, but it's not just tech, buddy, it's experience. And there's a lazy route and there's a connected route. The connected route will give you relationships. You've already seen this sort of surface in other verticals where it's all high tech and there's no touch. And then it's followed by this great exodus. Last time I checked, there's continuity to every business that's required, or you go out of business. So, if you want to differentiate, I would say where the real magic is create a customer experience that becomes your advantage. Warren Buffett would always talk about building a moat, like, the water around a castle, right? Building a moat to your service business. You go, John, what would that look like? Okay, in 2012, what is this, 2025? So 13 years ago, I'm in Texarkana, Texas. And Michael Coleman, dealer, who's still a client of ours, I said, okay, tell me a little bit about what you're doing for retention. Like, where would you say you're at in the process? Like, I just want to know how he thinks. And he's like, you're going to think I'm crazy. I said, okay, fire away. He said, I take retired guys, I grab half-ton vehicles or cars on the used car front line, and I take them he's in New Boston. So it's like 40, 50 miles outside of Texarkana. And he goes, these are doctors and lawyers and business people and whatever. And okay. He goes, and they work in Texarkana. So I have the retired person take them a vehicle and I pick up their vehicle, bring it here for service and take it back. So I kind of pause, I smile, and I'm like, Michael, not only is that not crazy, it's required. Like, you say it's crazy because most people in your 20 group don't do it. But to me, if you want retention, it's yours. Go get it. Mm-hmm. Go get it. You already wrote the check, cost of sale. You spent $400, $500, $600, $700 to acquire through advertising costs and cost of sale. So to me, convenience is your secret sauce. And I think at Traver Connect, that's our mission, literally making experience matter. But it's going to be for the customer, the consumer, for our client, right? And then with our incredible people. But you should model that. That's the why in that sucker right there.
What do you see as the biggest technology gaps today in fixed stops or BDCs?
Yeah. I would say currently the biggest gap is integration. Does that surprise you or no?
Not at all. In the auto industry. No.
Yeah, because you've done some SaaS work. Too many dealerships are still running in silos, right?
Yep.
CRM over here, scheduling over here, no one talking to each other, kills efficiency, frustrates customers. And for me, it screams, hey, are you guys in this or not? Are you just selling a product, or are we actually solving for something? Another gap, I would say, too, maybe second place would be real-time analytics. Mm-hmm. Most BDCs can't tell you how many calls turned into appointments today or why they didn't. You have a call intent that is appointment centric, but we couldn't get you in for 2 weeks. So today, when you finish the day, how many people were we not able to get them to wait 2.5 weeks? Would that be important for you to know?
Definitely.
Yeah. If I'm running that shop, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take Michael Coleman's book and say, I'll tell you what, let me come get your car. I'll put a car in there in your seat, in your driveway. We'll just work you in over the next couple of days. I mean, I see you grinning
that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. But I got to know that. So I think the other thing is, there's this huge talk about data, and having done what you've done, that's an easy topic to talk about and sound smart. But look, when the thing with data is there's so much of it, right? And so when everything is important, nothing's important because everything can't be important at the same degree. So you want to get to the core data points first. So you want to see your trends. Drucker used to say, see the bend in the trend. There's so many ways to look at this, but how do they impact, the example I just gave you a minute ago? Okay, yeah, 20 people today wanted to set an appointment, but it took us 2.5 weeks to get them in. So we begged, we pleaded, we said we'd give our right arm, and they still said, no, I'll just call you another time. And you know what they did? They called Pep Boys because they can get in there in 48 hours.
True.
Yeah, that's a problem. So the tech exists. It's just not stitched together smartly, buddy, as you know. And that's what we're pushing with Traver Connect, is closing the gap so dealers don't lose these opportunities, you know?
And any thoughts on like AI and some of the automation, coming to market right now?
Yeah, I think AI and automation are game changers. Maybe the right way to cast them is as enhancers, not replacements. In the BDC, AI, I think, can handle certain, for us, like statement of work items for us. Some of the repetitive terms. We got about 30% of customers that will actually play the AI game. Now, there are some markets where it's really high, but it's urban. And there's only X amount of urban markets in the US. So, sure. So for us, it's again, it's about experience. But it's not that we're out on it. We use it in our middleware, like bulletins, things like that, listening for keywords. But it should never be, here's our business rule, it should never be at the cost of customer experience. Here's the bottom line. If that experience is positive, mission accomplished, and you probably have another bite of the apple waiting for you, like that, right? Yeah. So I think the experience is the business. How you do business, how you retail pre-owned vehicles at your location, in case of this podcast, is your business. Notice I said how. Not selling cars, how you sell cars. Listen, if you really want to nail it, you want to go another click up, why you sell cars. I'll give you an example real quick. Good friend, Ed Roberts. You know who Ed Roberts is?
No.
Look him up when you get a chance. Yeah. Ed Roberts, COO, Bozard Ford, Bozard, Bozard Ford, in the metropolis of like St. Augustine, Florida. It's not a metropolis.
Yeah.
They're one of the largest Ford stores in the United States.
Wow.
You know what their why is? You want to know what? It's not, we want to sell a crap ton of cars and trucks. Their mission is to enhance the lives of others. You go, that's a little fluffy. Not in my book. Not in my book. Let me tell you something, what that looks like at Bozard. How many mobile vans for service, if you're listening to this podcast, do you have on the street? They got 50.
Impressive.
Your Learning Institute. How many educators and programs do you have for your staff at your Learning Institute? They have a 2-year waiting list for technicians to get in. Whereas most of us are trying to find technicians. They got the why right. So it's not just the consumer, but it's also their people. They got the why right. So when disruption, I think it comes if dealers over rely on the tech too much and lose the human touch. But back to AI, I would say it's a force multiplier. It's not a takeover. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And, as we look in 2025 and dealers maybe becoming more cost conscious, where do you think they should focus to drive the highest ROI from their fixed operations or their business in general?
Yeah. Well, I think one is double down on fixed. If you don't have fixed, double down on fixed, because all the obvious reasons, it's the highest margin part of the business, especially for used car lots, right? So focus on streamlining service processes, cut your wait times, boost your appointment conversions, upsell smart, all that. Invest in learning and development too. Not just tech, but a well-trained BDC team can turn a $50 oil change opportunity into a $400 maintenance visit. You didn't knock anybody's head off. You kept the car on the road longer. I mean, that's you're selling hours, all this stuff, right? Don't sleep on outsourcing either, because there's only, like right now, I'll give you an example. In Automotive News F&I section, here's an article that just came out this past week. It says JM&A, what does it say?
Predicts expansion of virtual F&I.
So what is that? It says uses virtual F&I staffing to help stores without enough employees to handle incoming deals that don't have enough volume to justify hiring another full-time manager. They're expensive. You might have a 0.3, a 0.4, a 0.5 need. How do you get there? All I'm doing is, this literally is what we do. It supports, it's just another part of the dealership. Your payroll. ADP bought my last company. One of their divisions was Automotive Dealer Services, which has become CDK Global today, but it was ADP back then. And again, that's BPO. So make sure. Drucker used to say, sell the mailroom. Look that up. Study on that. I think it's about doing more with less, not just cutting corners. You focus there, and I think you'll be prepared to weather some storms and also to make some really nice strides.
So to kind of wrap things up, and John, it's just been an amazing episode. I've learned a lot. I'm sure all of the listeners have as well. So what are you most excited about in the next year for Traver Connect and the automotive space generally?
Yeah, I'm internally fired up about our people, because our mission is making experience matter, and it's theirs, yours, ours. Theirs, consumer; yours, our dealers and partners, and ours, our people. But we can't do it without the third one. So to me, I'm really excited, because the ideas that are here that we're executing on, the ideas that are coming, got the right people. That's what I'm excited about. We're rolling out tools that tighten up sales to service handoff. I think seamless lead tracking from the lot to the bay is also a play that we have for the front end. Screen pops when a web form is filled out. We're talking to a customer in about 20 seconds. That's kind of cool, and it's real simple technology, but it's just done the right way. Industry wise, I'm excited to see dealers embrace remote buying and servicing. More customers want it. The tech is there, so there's a journey there. The wedding signatures I get, so you got to navigate that. But and I think proving that innovation isn't just for new cars or EVs; it's for every pre-owned dealer who wants to win. I'm excited to see it unfold.
Awesome. Well, John, thanks again for joining me on the podcast. It's just been great.
Zach, it's been our pleasure. Thank you for having us.